Hi. How do I make my sewing fun, fast, and easy? By planning and preparing. One of the ways I prep is by transferring the important pattern marks to my fabric. So come on into my sewing room or my cutting table and I'll show you how I do it. My mom taught me how to sew a long time ago, and she used 3 different ways of marking her fabric. So you need to mark your fabric before you get into making something. Notches, sometimes you need to mark the right side or the wrong side of a fabric. It's really hard to tell the difference. And so these are the 3 tools that my mother used 50 years ago, and I still use them today. The first one is a sliver of soap. My mother was very frugal, and if a sliver of soap became too small to wash with, she used it to mark her fabric. It's very thin, it has a nice sharp edge. Drag it across your fabric, and it leaves a mark. And because it's made of soap, you know that it's going to wash out. Another tool that my mother used, another marking tool, are these pieces of hard chalk, made by many different companies. They're hard, they're pretty strong until you drop them on the floor and then they break into pieces, but you can still use the small pieces. And they're all used the same way. Drag it across your fabric, mark your notches, do whatever it takes to make the marks on your fabric. These do brush off, but it does require a little bit of effort, so don't press too hard with your chalk. The other marking tool was tracing paper. It used to be waxed. Nowadays it's hard to find the wax stuff. Now it's more of a chalk. It's a wax-free. The drawback of the waxed was that it left marks on your fabric, and then when you pressed it with the hot iron, the wax would transfer to your material and it would never come out. So how it's used is you place the chalk side out. You place it between your layers of fabric that are wrong sides together, so your chalk is on the wrong side of your fabric. You've got your pattern. Let's say that we need to trace a dart today. So you put your pattern on top. You'd put a couple of pins in to hold it, of course, and then you use one of these toothed tracing wheels to make the marks. I like to mark the bottom of the leg of the dart. I like to mark where the dots are on my dart. And then as I move up the dart, I make small, jagged, pressing firmly back and forth. And that will leave a mark. Remove your pattern, take your tracing paper out, and it's very faint, but on my black fabric here, I can see the darts. Yeah, I think it shows up on the camera. And that's the old methods that we used to use to mark our fabric. While I'm on the chalk theme, I'm going to show you a few more chalk markers for fabric. The first one is a loose chalk that comes in a little case like this. They both work the same. They've got a little wheel at the end, and by dragging the wheel across the fabric, it leaves a mark. Both of these are white, so they show up really well on dark fabrics. It's also a loose chalk, so it brushes off really easily. This one here is refillable. It's made by Clover, so when it's empty you only have to buy a refill, not the entire little gadget. Chalk pencils come in many different colors. Again, all of the chalk marks really well on darker fabrics. You would not use a white chalk on a white fabric or on a very light fabric, but these are very effective on these darker ones. Easy to draw lines, easy to draw little notches at the edges of your fabric. And then these come with little brushes, so that with a little bit of elbow grease, you can get most of the marks off. My very favorite chalk pencil, though, is this one from Fons and Porter. For a long time we were looking for something that behaved like a pen, acted like a pen, but was chalk and that would mark on dark fabrics. And then I found this one. It's retractable, it's refillable, and now they come in different colors. But to use it, you use it just like a regular pen. You can make very fine marks at the edges of your fabric, but if you needed to make very clear marks, if you were doing an applique and you needed to position, you needed to mark where to position it, where to do some top stitching, with this pencil you can do that. The end of it is rubberized, and with a little bit of elbow grease, you can get rid of the most of it. These friction pens are kind of a new kid on the block. They work like a ballpoint pen. They've got a very fine tip. They come in lots of colors. They don't show up very well on dark fabrics, but on light fabrics they're wonderful. They're great for marking notches within the seam allowance. And then I forgot to plug my iron in, so I can't show you how easy these marks disappear. But you can see them on the camera there. Just touching it with the hot iron will make the marks disappear completely. These garment fabrics are very tightly knit, very stretchy. They don't run, they don't unravel, so the easiest way to mark notches and things inside the seam allowance is to make little tiny snips with your scissors. If the seam allowance is 1/4 inch, you want to be sure that you don't go any farther than 1/4 inch. But as you can see, that little notch is there in front of the camera. So you will just look for your little snips. You can just snip right into the seam allowance and then match your pieces up. So these 3 fabrics are all very stretchy. This one in particular was very hard to mark, but by making a little snip in the seam allowance, I was able to mark where my notches were and my center fronts, center backs, all the things that I needed to mark. These 2 markers are both a felt pen. The one in the blue case is a water soluble. It's got a felt tip, it's fairly fine, and you can use it to mark on your fabric. It's wonderful if you're trying to place appliques, say you're wanting to place a vine across your fabric, perhaps you're wanting to do a bunch of small embroideries, and so you want to place each one at a very specific spot. When you're finished with this one and you've done all your work, and if marks still show up, it disappears with the spritz of some water. This other one is a heat, or not a heat away, it's an air, it's just fast fade, I guess would be, that's what it says on the labels, fast fade. I always called it air erasable. It draws a beautifully dark purple line. You can see it shows up really well. In time, it just disappears. Different markers take different lengths of time to disappear. I once had one that would disappear overnight, and I learned that because I had used it to prepare kits for a class I was teaching the next day, and when I got in that morning, all my marks had disappeared. Not a good day. But it will disappear in time. This particular one comes with an extra tip, and this is the eraser tip, so if you're in a hurry for it to disappear, you can just use it. And you can see that my mark is starting to fade where I'm drawing over with this extra little tip, but in time it will go away. The other one, you just go squirt, squirt, and you can see it's disappearing before our eyes. Sometimes you have working with a fabric that you don't want to make wet, and that's where the air disappearing one would come in really handy. Otherwise, the blue one works really well. And that's it for these.